We all know that Adolf Hitler can be held responsible for pretty much all of the carnage of the 1930s and 40s. But what about his supporters? What about the people who bought into his ideologies? Here we count down 10 of the worst Nazis. Number 10. Friedrich Jeckeln. A First World War veteran, Friedrich Jeckeln became an SS leader and police commander in the occupied Soviet Union. In his position of power, Jeckeln was in charge of all of the SS Einsatzgruppen, Nazi death squads, activities and executions in the USSR. Under his command, three of the most infamous SS massacres were committed, those at Babi Yar, Rumbula, and Kamianets-Podilsky. Jeckeln was horrifically effective at mass killing, developing his own system known as sardine packing that even shocked many of the executioners who worked beneath him in the SS. Trenches were dug and victims would be forced to lie face down in the trench, most often on fresh corpses of newly killed prisoners, as prisoners were executed in cycles. All told, Jeckeln was responsible for killing over 100,000 people in mass executions during the war, a notorious feat that saw him hanged by the Red Army in 1946. Number 9. Ilse Koch. Ilse Koch earned many nicknames over the course of her time at Buchenwald and Majdanek concentration camps. Known as the Bitch of Buchenwald, or the Beast of Buchenwald, Koch was not even a guard of the concentration camps, but instead the wife of SS Commander Karl Koch. Using her husband's power for her own sadism, Koch outshone many Nazis in her utter depravity. Koch routinely raped and beat inmates at the camps, had them tortured while she watched, and if inmates looked at her in a way she didn't like, she had them executed on the spot. Most shockingly, Koch often inspected incoming prisoners to the camps, hoping to find new arrivals with tattoos on their body that she found attractive. If Koch found an inmate with tattoos she desired, she had them executed and skinned, and kept the skins with plans to make adornments for her home out of them. Koch was arrested by Allied forces following the liberation of the concentration camps and tried as a civilian for war crimes. She hung herself in prison in 1967. Number 8. Greta Bosel. A practicing nurse before the Second World War and the opening of the concentration camps, Greta Bosel was the work input overseer at the Ravensbrück concentration camp. At Ravensbrück, it was Bosel's responsibility to determine which incoming prisoners were fit enough to be put to work and suffer the toils of the camp, and those who were deemed unfit for work and thus were to be gassed immediately. Without remorse or regard for human life whatsoever, Bosel took her ideology to heart, declaring, "If they cannot work, let them rot." After the war, Bosel was charged with murder, among other things, and sentenced to death by a war crimes tribunal. Number 7. Joseph Goebbels. The man who invented the phrase total war. Joseph Goebbels was the Minister of Propaganda in Hitler's Germany and was exclusively responsible for all government material aimed at the public. A voracious anti-Semite, Goebbels' propaganda propagated the campaign against the Jewish people of Germany, and his hate speech played a large role in bending the German people's views of the Nazis from skeptical to supportive, and finally all-encompassing. Even when the Third Reich's defeat was all but assured, Goebbels called upon his rhetoric of total war to urge Germany to continue to fight to the last man, woman, and child. One to never sway away from his beliefs, Goebbels remained with Hitler in Berlin until the very end. Goebbels, along with his wife, killed their 6 children before both committing suicide as the Red Army captured Berlin in 1945. Number 6. Adolf Eichmann. Using his knowledge of the Hebrew language and his vast studies of Jewish culture to aid in convincing Jews from occupied territories to leave their lives and possessions behind in order to live a better life in the Jewish ghettos, Adolf Eichmann was largely responsible for the deportation of Jews within the Reich. Furthermore, after the final solution had been decided upon, Eichmann also helped plan and implement the movement of peoples from the ghettos to the concentration camps. One of the architects of the Holocaust, after the war, Adolf Eichmann escaped capture and fled to South America, eventually being apprehended by Israeli Secret Service. Eichmann was executed in 1962. Number 5. Maria Mandel. Austrian-born Maria Mandel was responsible for the death of at least 500,000 inmates during her time as the female SS commandant of the Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camps between 1942 and 1944. Known as the Beast beyond her official duties at the camp, Mandel also routinely engaged in acts of abuse and torture of her inmates and selected certain prisoners, most often Jewish prisoners, to be her pet for a short period before signing their death certificate. For her service to the Reich, Mandel was awarded the War Merit Cross Second Class. For her crimes against humanity, Maria Mandel was tried and executed in 1948. Number 4. Joseph Mengele. The Angel of Death, Joseph Mengele, is the incarnation of a horror movie come to life. An entire era of horror and death and destruction, Mengele was exceptionally terrifying. An SS physician, Mengele was initially responsible for selecting which incoming prisoners to Auschwitz would be forced to work or be gassed. His role in selection alone made him a war criminal, but it was Mengele's experiments at Auschwitz that truly magnified the utter madness of the Nazi regime. Fascinated with genetics and heredity, Mengele would use inmates for his research. In reality, what Mengele engaged in was nothing more than barbarism and mutilation, amputations, chemical injections into subjects' eyes, and even removing one identical twin's eyes and sewing them onto the back of the other twin's head. Science had nothing to do with Mengele's butchery, and though no punishment would be severe enough for his crimes, he evaded capture his entire life and died of a stroke in Brazil in 1979. Number 3. Reinhard Heydrich. The Hangman of Prague, SS member Reinhard Heydrich, was one of the most feared and brutal Nazis in his short career. Even Hitler regarded him as the man with the iron heart. Beyond being in control of the area of Czechoslovakia that was absorbed into the Reich in 1939, where he brutally repressed political dissidents and cultural opposition, Heydrich was one of the primary organisers of the Kristallnacht in Germany before the Holocaust, was responsible for creating and operating Einsatzgruppen death squads that were responsible for the mass executions throughout the Second World War, and also one of the primary architects of the final solution. As the chairman of the Wannsee Conference in 1942, Heydrich was explicitly involved in creating the Order of Forced Labour, or the murder of all the Jews in Germany and the occupied territories. Not long after the conference, Czech special agents trained in Britain would assassinate Heydrich in Prague. Number 2. Oskar Paul Dollwanger. Oskar Paul Dollwanger was the leader of the infamous Waffen SS 36th Grenadier Division, where members of the SS were sent to fight on the front line if they had been convicted of a crime. He is invariably described as an extremely cruel character by historians and researchers, including as a psychopathic killer, child molester, as violently sadistic, and as an expert in extermination and a devotee of sadism and necrophilia. Prior to World War II, he was convicted of statutory rape of a 14-year-old girl in which he served 2 years in prison, and upon his release committed similar crimes. As a very experienced war veteran, instead of being sentenced to death, he was given the opportunity to fight on the front line, and thus the infamous Dollwanger Brigade was born. It is said that even Himmler and Hitler despised him, but thought him to be of some use, so he managed to avoid the firing squad. Officially, he died of natural causes in 1945 in French custody, but his cellmate claims he was savagely beaten to death by Polish prison guards. Number 1. Heinrich Himmler. Heinrich Himmler is one of the largest mass murderers of all time. Anywhere from 12 to 14 million civilians, including 6 million Jews, were murdered by the Nazi regime, all of which were ultimately a result of Himmler's policies. After Heydrich's death, Himmler led brutal reprisals in Czechoslovakia and ultimately expanded on the plans at the Wannsee Conference to institute the extermination of the Jewish people. As devoted to his ideology as Himmler was during the war, once it was clear that Germany was destined to fall, Himmler began negotiations with the Allies, unbeknownst to Hitler. When Hitler discovered Himmler's treachery, he ordered him arrested. The British arrested him first, and while in custody, he died. The official reports claim suicide, although this is very heavily debated. Most believe he was murdered while in Allied custody.